City Council on October 28th, Subcommittee on Finance and Property and Committee of the Whole. We have two matters before us this evening only. Order number 466 and its accompanying documents 466A, which is a resolution, and then we also have order number 444, which is a order relative to raise and appropriate by the mayor for Beverly Public Schools. I want to, before we go any further, indicate that this evening's proceedings are being taped and both audio and video, which is a matter of right for members of the public who wish to do that. And unless we have any procedural questions by councilors, what I'm going to do is start out simply by reading the text of the resolution before us, so we all have a fresh memory of what it says, and then we'll discuss it in subcommittee, and then for members of the public who may not be familiar with the process, open up to any questions or conversation by the rest of the subcommittee, of the council. This is a public hearing. This is not a public meeting. This is not a public hearing. So members of the public are here as essentially as observers. With no further ado, Resolution 466 reads as follows. Whereas elected officials have an obligation to see to the responsible use of taxpayer dollars, and the local manipulation of $2 million in taxpayer dollars is an event worth addressing on the record. Whereas elected officials in Beverly, by reference to attached letters, are on notice, and the attached letters are 466A, are on notice that on November 1st, 2013, the Massachusetts Historical Commission certified on the National Register a district called the Beverly Depot Odell Park Historic District, referred to in the rest of the resolution as district, and soon thereafter learned that the local business which applied to create the district intended to use that certification to both request rehabilitation tax credits for one building in the district while demolishing others in the district. And on December 31st, 2013, Massachusetts Historical Commission wrote that local business to say that the tax credit program serves, quote, not only as an economic stimulus, but as an historic rehabilitation and preservation program, close quote, and that certification of the district on the National Register is not to be, quote, manipulated, close quote, and, quote, not to be used as a means of gaining tax credits on one project while simultaneously destroying other significant historic buildings, close quote. Therefore, the Massachusetts Historical Commission said, quote, it is unable to issue final certification on your project, close quote, and it refused to issue the requested tax credits. And on January 6, 2014, the beginning of the next year, that business replied, quote, although it is true the preferred development plan would include demolition of these buildings, in light of the Commission's position and its implication for the pending tax credit application, I have concluded that the buildings must remain, close quote. Following that, 1 month later, on February 6, 2014, Massachusetts Historical Commission wrote in further reply to say, quote, as you know, the creation of the district enabled you to apply for both state and federal historic rehabilitation tax credits, and, quote, in your January 6, 2014 letter, you stated you have concluded that the buildings must remain, and, quote, as you have indicated your intention to rehabilitate these buildings, this letter serves as final certification for the project, and, quote, final certification is with the understanding that you intend to rehabilitate the buildings, close quote. Whereas, after that, more than $2 million in state and federal tax credits were applied for and in reliance on explicit representation were given. This tax benefit was provided by Beverly taxpayers as much as by other taxpayers. But violating its commitment, if not the law, this local business waited until that benefit could no longer be retracted. And now it prepares to demolish the very buildings whose historic significance to this community it promoted and were required to get a substantial tax benefit, a benefit that by its own words it represented would be used to preserve, not destroy these buildings. Whereas the council acknowledges the charitable contributions have been made by this business and its principals to our cities, such contributions do not bypass to excuse any local business from acting in this manner to gain tax benefits from Beverly citizens while removing from them their history. Whereas this council condemns such corporate behavior as inconsistent with our community values, and whereas businesses operating in the city of Beverly are expected to exercise good and responsible corporate citizenship and exercise civic honesty in the course of their business. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council of the City of Beverly calls upon all businesses operating in our city to exercise good and responsible corporate citizenship and uphold community values of civic honesty in the conduct of their business. So that is the resolution before the subcommittee this evening for consideration. And I would ask if any members of the subcommittee would like to comment or ask questions about it, and then any of the other councilors.
Just a question, if I could, of you, because you're the one that penned the resolution. What was your rationale? I mean, you spoke about this business. What was your rationale about not naming it specifically in your resolution?
A couple of things. Primarily because Windover as a company collectively has filed something like 22 separate LLCs. And the company that presently owns the properties that are part of this historic district have collectively filed more than 22 separate LLCs. So the various different ownerships and management are kind of obscure and complex to describe. And so I thought it was important to try to simplify it because it's a complicated subject as much as I could. The other thing is I want to make very clear that this is not, from my point of view in drafting the ordinance, is not intended to be personal or specific to a given business. It's intended to relate to business practices generally as taxpayer funds are involved. So for me, this is really a matter of how businesses in Beverly deal with taxpayer benefits, because we are all taxpayers, and that's, as city councilors, we are here to represent them. Is that a good enough full answer?
You know, I was going to go down that same line of questioning, but did you have any help in drafting this, or did you do this yourself?
No, I drafted it myself.
Okay. You're an attorney, as we know, and you work in the real estate field. How would you feel if a city council in Salem, for instance, where you do practice, took an action against you when you were trying to deliberate before a body in this manner? Would you feel that it was helpful or hurtful?
Well, I'm not sure the question applies because for two reasons. One is this is not intended to direct towards a specific business. It's intended to be directed towards business conduct in general. And secondly, I think that in this case, this involves taxpayer funds. Mm-hmm. And I'm a private business, and if I have a contract relationship with another business, then if there's an argument over whether that contract was kept, the court system is where you go to work that out, that issue. In this case, this involves taxpayer money, so it's really, from my point of view, relates to taxpayers of Beverly and taxpayer benefits generally. And I guess the third thing I would say is, so long as you don't, what's the word? As long as you keep your promises when it comes to the use of taxpayer funds, then, you know, if you break that promise, then if I accepted taxpayer funds and broke a promise in the course of using those, then I think that would be fair.
So what you're saying is that you don't see this specifically against one company or another, and yet you name very specific events and places and dates that apply really to one specific case. So if we were deliberating business ethical standards for all those complying going forward, I could see this as being incredibly helpful, that we would take a stand this way. But to me, it almost feels that we are inserting ourselves in a case where we don't have a deliberation before us, and it almost prejudices what is going on. But I'll let you sway me.
Well, I think that I took great pains to draw from a specific example a broader discussion and a broader principle. So it was a very difficult resolution to write.
Right.
It's an unusual resolution. I did my very best to remove from the specific descriptions, the references to any names. I did that on purpose, and yet in order to set out the facts, there's no way to really set out the facts
Right.
without incorporating the specifics that we're talking about. So, you know, in the quotes of the letters, I didn't say who wrote the letters or anything. I did my best to thread the needle or walk the line, and so, you know, I'll just leave it at that. Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't see it that way, because right away you mentioned the entity by name and the fact that they have 20 other LLCs operating. So,
Well, that was in
thought would
response.
be-
That was in response to some question. That's not part of the resolution.
My thought would be that you remove some of that specific language and, you know, try and make this resolution much more generic to that specific case, but any future specific case that may be, you know, unauthorization or whatever you term the use, because it certainly wasn't illegal. It was a loophole that should be closed, there's no question about it. And how we effectively legislate that or put it in the resolution, that's something that I think you can phrase a little bit more generally.
I am open and happy to consider any edits you might suggest to help get to that end. I'm certainly not smart enough to think of everything, and I'm open to suggestions to make it a better resolution.
Well, I'd love to listen to the rest
So-
of the council, but I would
Yeah.
pledge to you that I would help you with some wording if it might work out.
Yeah. I would also point out that I also went to pains, again, without mentioning any specifics, to recognize the contributions have been made
Yeah.
by this business. So I'm trying very hard to be even-handed and to be fair in trying to draw from a specific example a general principle. Beverly is a city with many historic properties in it. I don't know what's coming down the road. It's perfectly possible that we could have historic tax credit, applications in the future. If they were, I think that at least speaking personally, I think the taxpayers that I have heard from, constituents I've heard from, would not like to see the way in which this was structured for the statute of limitations to run, and then sort of ignore a commitment that was made. So I'm trying to speak for taxpayer money, but also to look towards the future, towards development in Beverly, and say, if this were to be used again as a device, I also want to say very clearly for the record, that the tax credits were used initially for a good purpose. They created veterans housing, very clear about that, that it's not the tax credits that I have a problem with are the way they were used, because they were used in a beneficial way to provide affordable housing for veterans. It's what went with the tax credits is the part that I have the problem with, that I believe the record is clear that there was a promise made, not kept.
And the only other thing I want to bring up is that this resolution, and I'll just speak for myself, we saw probably 10 o'clock on Monday night, last Monday night, after very lengthy deliberations. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Anyway, if we can phrase it a little bit more generically, that's my only thought.
I'm on record as not liking late files and then asking for immediate votes. I think that my record in the council is pretty clear on that point. So, you know, I think it's appropriate to take the time necessary to do it right. And the fact that it was a late file was not while I was eager to get it for discussion, that doesn't mean that I was looking for an immediate vote to try to, this is really something for the council. This is not.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Other councilors? Any questions, comments? Councilor Rand?
Thank you. I figured, as this is really in reference to something that's happening in Ward 2, that I should be prepared to comment on this. So I want to just start by saying that I do really appreciate the final resolution, the final statement of this resolution in front of us that is really speaking to the value of good and responsible corporate citizenship. And I actually think that this is a really excellent way to open that conversation, much like Councilor Frady's was saying, that's maybe something that this council hasn't really tapped into as an opportunity to lay down values and then take them one step further and say, how can we actually come up with a process to, you know, have agreements and more conversation between corporations and especially development, as it's happening, a lot of it in Ward 2, but will be continuing to happen around the city. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I know personally, I really notice the voices that are missing from those public hearings. We hear a lot from people who are concerned about parking and traffic, but not a lot from people who see kind of a higher vision for how we could partner with corporations and developers. So I would support going forward a process that puts into place some way of coming up with agreements like that, that's more formalized than maybe more formalized than even this resolution, right? Like this resolution can be a stepping off point of how to get to a process that helps us become better partners with our corporate partners. I guess, and then just to speak to the kind of the meat of this resolution, it is clearly directed at Beverly Crossing and their project and the history of the Beverly Depot 2 project, which, as you can see from the bulk of this resolution, is not, if I can share my opinion, is not an easy or a pleasant history to recount. I mean, these were some decisions that were made that have resulted in a lack of trust in this company, and I think that's what we're seeing in this process, is more a lack of trust in Beverly Crossing, who at the time of this was almost a completely different corporation, right? It was Windover, and there was other leadership involved. So, I mean, as the Ward 2 councilor, I support bringing this information out. I think it's important to make sure that the public understands the history of that property. I don't know that this resolution is the most direct way of bringing that information out and supporting a positive step in corporate citizenship. So to me, there's sort of two separate issues combined into one. And I know you Councilor Houseman, you worked really hard on this and struggled with that very notion. So I think you handled it well, but I do still think it to cram these two issues together and to not directly say, look, I have a problem with how Beverly Crossing handled this, is sort of, I don't know. I'd rather say I have a problem with how Beverly Crossing handled this, and we expect good corporate citizenship, than to say, by the way, we expect good corporate citizenship, and here's an example of one that we didn't think was good.
Yeah, no, I respect that feedback, and as you say, I struggled with the best way to sort of raise the subject. For me, the reason I wrote the resolution and struggled with it has to do with taxpayer money. That's what I have the problem with. So I'm not trying to address or discuss the design of the application that is before the planning board. I'm very explicitly trying not to do that. I am
Right.
trying to talk about taxpayer money and the history in this case that I think unfolded in a very, unfolding in a very unfortunate way. So that's why, sort of in part to Councilor Frady's, in order to talk about the tax credits, it's hard to do that in the abstract. Why are we talking about tax credits if I don't lay out a sort of a specific fact pattern that says what's going on here, that gives people something to talk about? So that is a challenge was a challenge in drafting this resolution.
I would agree with that. And I would also just add that there is, I think, what I didn't say very clearly in my little example is that there's so much more to good corporate citizenship than just that piece.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it falls short of only supporting good corporate citizenship, because it is just focused on that instance of the $2 million tax credit.
Yeah, I did try to go from the specific to the more general.
Yeah, and I think we could probably, as a council, and perhaps that should be on our retreat agenda, that we as a council could come up with a serious list of what we expect and what we value as good corporate citizenship and partnership.
Councilor Flowers.
Thank you. I think just sort of piggybacking on what Councilor Rand has been talking about, one of the things that I really appreciate in this resolution is what is being resolved at the end, which I know Councilor Rand was lifting up as well. But thinking about this notion of being a community where we think about what our values are and what corporate citizenship could look like, and sort of a dream, a goal of mine that I'd love to see us think together about. And I think starting with talking about our values might be is a place to start, but there are communities that have responsible employer ordinances. And I think what that takes into account is sort of this broad range of what we're talking about, what it means to be a corporate citizen, what it means in your employment practice, in your hiring practices, in your in how you treat tax credits. I think it's sort of a broad look at what it means. But what I think is exciting about being in the position that Beverly is in right now is I think it's always a good time for a community to consider what its values are and what it asks of its corporate citizens. I think when a community is experiencing what Beverly is now, which is a desirable place for businesses to want to be, and we've obviously seen that developers are interested in developing here, and I think in that case, we have a lot of strength in our ability to state what our community values are and what we would ask of our corporate partners, because I think we have the ability to say, this is a community where we recognize that there's a lot of reasons that you might want to do business here and be in this community, and if you would like to do that, here are our values, and let's work together if you can live within these values. So that's something I'd love to see us do in the future. But what I appreciate is that I think the resolution, what is being resolved at the end, to me, provides a good stepping stone into that conversation. So that's something I would love to see us you start here and then take that next step into considering that kind of an ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Any other,
Yeah,
Councilor Freitas, again?
I want to add one more thing. Right after this meeting, there's another meeting down at Beverly Farms about a small development that's going on, and we're going to hear from the developer himself. The neighbors will probably raise concerns. And my question is this: without some sort of guidance document or ordinance or resolution, are we going to then bring, am I required to then bring whatever the neighbors and the abutters are concerned about and craft a resolution, not naming the developer, but the instances? That's where I'm getting at, is it seems to be so finite in what it is doing instead of more forward-looking.
So this, as I said before, uses quotes to be accurate and lays out a history.
But I
It
think
does
you
not,
can
it,
go
it,
much
it,
into
it does not address or take a position in any fashion on pros and cons of any project in this city. Now, I understand you're saying it's close, and I know Councilor Rand said, hey, well, it's talking about this. Well, yes, it draws from a specific instance, but there are people who have spoken both for and against a project that is before the planning board. This doesn't address that at all. It doesn't address design, it doesn't address scale, it doesn't address the neighbors who agree with it, the neighbors who disagree with it, the members of the business community who think it's great. I favor transit-oriented development. I think the redevelopment on Rantoul Street has been a net positive, remains a net positive. This doesn't try to address any of that. And so when you say, I have a bunch of constituents who don't like what a particular developer is doing, what should I be doing? Should I be drafting a resolution? I would say no. This is not about a specific, this is about about a principle of corporate citizenship
I got it.
drawn from a specific example. And the other thing is, it's taxpayer money. That's really what motivated me. And
Totally understand. And I think there can be different language and different timing involved here, because to take it to an absurd note is, say this development tonight, we craft the same similar resolution, and then therefore the attorney uses it as an Exhibit A that the city council has drafted a resolution against this particular project before it's even decided.
it does not take any position on the project. It does not. It talks about the use of the tax credits and what's happening or not happening with them, and the preservation of buildings. So I know you indicated to me before the meeting that you had actually not read the resolution and not read the underlying letters. I would suggest before you take a position on it, you actually read the underlying order and the underlying letters, and then perhaps the conversation can be
Well, thanks for
continued.
pointing that out, but also, 10 o'clock Monday night, you were trying to get my signature on that resolution before we even read it.
I was trying to find out if you supported it, sure, but I wasn't trying to get a signature per se.
With your pen in hand to the resolution, that's what I
Yeah, I
was
don't think.
inferring.
Yes, please, Councilor Freed.
Council Fraser is trying to say is that because it's before the planning board, that whatever position we take, whether if we sign this today or next week, it's before the planning board. And as much as you want to have this about the tax credits, and I understand that, I think the general public, because it's before the planning board, might look at it a little differently. They might say, we're trying to influence the decision. I'm not saying you're trying to do that, but the general public could look at it that way. And we haven't even, I know they're before the planning board, but it wouldn't be bad to maybe hear from them what they have to say. Have Beverly Crossing, what they have to say. Now, I understand in the first part of this, what they have done doesn't seem like it's good practice, right? And I assume all of us agree on that. And they are good corporate citizens because they've done a lot of good things. but there are a lot of, I say a lot, I shouldn't say that. There are other businesses that we haven't taken stands on before, and maybe we should have, but we start doing that now, and when Councilor Frady's is saying, up on the farms doesn't go their way, and it's before the planning board, they're gonna look for a resolution as well. It might not be on the tax credits, but it might be on something else. I'm not saying I don't support this, but it is concerning that whatever direction we're going, and I think that's what Councilor Frady's is going. You know, I would like to hear from them. I mean, just to have an idea of what their thoughts of why, and I was the other night, several nights that they explained why, but I don't think all the council was to say, hey, why did you do this? Give me a better understanding before the council of why you did that and why your business did this. I think that would be helpful for us to learn, to pass a resolution without even hearing from them. You know, and one other thing I want to point out too, because it is more this about the tax credits. A lot of people in this city are concerned of the redevelopment of Rantoul Street, and you can argue that, you know, 10 years ago, Rantoul Street was a ghost town, and no one wanted to go down there. And you look down there now, and things are moving in the right direction. The thing is, too much, too soon, maybe. We can always argue that. That is a concern. But instead of always looking at the businesses, they're saying, hey, listen, this is what they're doing wrong. You know what? We as a city council, and as a mayor, and as a planning board, because of the zoning, need to take a look at ourselves. That's why we're doing the master plan, to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we need to take a look at ourselves as well, to say, maybe we're doing too much, and it's okay to say that, you know? Say, hey, listen, we're the ones who put the zoning regulations in, so these companies can kind of do what they're doing. You know, when they come in, they go to the mayor's office, they go to the planning department, and they say, hey, Mr. Mayor, planning department, they don't come to us. You know, they come to them and they say, what can we build in this city that will go through the planning board? And they say, I think you can build this particular building. No, design, you know, review guidelines aside, this is what they do, whether it be Beverly Crossing or another business. But yet, they're vilified as soon as they build these buildings. But we have got to take responsibility of that as well. I know that's a little different than the resolution on your side, but I think the general public look at this as more than just the tax credits. And I'm not saying I'm not going to support this, but I think it is a broader discussion than just the kind of Council Flowers talked about. It's a broader discussion than just the tax credits before us.
Okay, Councilor, did you have your hand up?
I did. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on some of this. My concern tonight was really we could outline where the $2 million was spent. And I heard
What, I'm sorry?
where the $2 million was spent. And how did that benefit the project, or will it benefit in the future? Or now that there's going to be a demolition, is that money really wasted? I heard there was some discussion about veterans housing. So I think before I would make a better judgment, I would like to have a better understanding of the background. And I think that has been explained at some of those other hearings, which I did not attend. So.
Yeah, the one thing, oh, I'm sorry.
No, just, aren't we trying to keep that separate?
I'm trying to keep that separate.
All right, I mean, to bring the people who shall be, remain nameless, up to speak before a television camera and a studio audience, kind of goes against what you're trying to do here. I think Council Frady's hit it right on the head when he spoke and talked about sitting down, working on this, make it a little more generic. Councilor Rand followed up with, as did Council Flowers, about that last, therefore now be it resolved is great. I think if you take that and work backwards towards some sort of resolution, because what happened already happened. We want to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
So let me disagree with a number of the things that have been said here. When you look at the language, so I've said, listen, that the tax credits were in fact received, were given, received, and used to help create affordable housing at 60 Pleasant Street, affordable housing for veterans, okay? And that's a good thing. The resolution and the issue that is posed by the tax credits is not the beneficial use they got, It is that those were given with a condition. And the condition was that not simply do you use them for that building and that project. When you accept these, when you applied for these and when you accept these, you did so making a representation that to us, the government, okay, the Massachusetts Historic Commission, you made a representation that if you accept these tax credits, you will not tear down the other historic buildings in the district, okay? That's where I have the problem, because they asked for the credits were going to be given to them until the Massachusetts Historic Commission found out that they were planning on tearing down buildings that they had put themselves on the National Register, and then withdrew those credits and said, or I should say not withdrew them, said, hey, just a second, you can't have your cake and eat it too here. You're welcome to have the tax credits. You're welcome to spend it, apply those to this project, but understand that you can't get them. We're not going to give them to you if you also tear down other buildings in the district that you created. End of story. You don't get the tax credits. Then the business wrote back and said, oh, well, in that case, we agree the buildings must remain. Period. They made a representation, they made a promise, a commitment, okay? And based upon that, the Massachusetts Historic Commission wrote back and said, okay, now that you've agreed that you will not tear down the other buildings, here are the tax credits. Spend them, okay? That's the history. That's what's quoted in these letters. And so this is not just about what happened already. This is what is proposed to happen in the future, okay? And what is proposed to happen in the future is that the commitment that was made upon which the tax credits were accepted was that the other buildings would not be torn down, okay? And they made, okay, so that's why this, to my way of thinking, is about taxpayer money, and it is forward thinking. So I just want to clarify that point. It's not about, well, that we're all said and done. And I think that the discussion about values is an important one. I would say that as a lawyer, I would go very slowly down that road because they say, not to be overly lawyerly, but the Supreme Court makes its decisions very narrowly. It doesn't want to get out ahead of itself. Okay, it wants to handle things on a case-by-case basis. So, I try to limit this to this. I agree that the broader statement about values is important, and I agree that obviously I think that the City Council should make clear that we have a fundamental value placed on good corporate citizenship, and that's really what I'm trying to get at. Councilor Martin, we haven't heard from you yet.
Yes, I think we can work on this resolution and pass something, but I think we need to be careful not to slander a company.
Well, it would be libel, not slander, but
whatever term you want to use.
Yeah, no,
I think, because you're basically saying that they're dishonest, more or less.
I'm saying a promise was made, and a proposal has been made to not keep that promise.
Okay, I think that if we want this to work, we have to remove any mention of any company or any insinuation that this company did something wrong. Because it won't work with doing it. And if that case, we need to hear from the company you're saying was possibly
And I am
not honest.
I am in full support of not slandering or libeling anyone or any company.
Okay.
So
You're doing a pretty good job at it.
Well,
I'm
I don't
just
think
trying to
so.
be fair. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't
think
have,
so.
I just want to be fair, that's all.
well, I specifically do reference that good things have been done by this company, and I also reference that the tax credits were in fact spent for a good end. So I'm trying to be balanced here.
I understand that,
and
but
very
always
much
that
not.
but. Oh, they've done good work here, but
That-
I just want to be careful.
Yeah, that's
and I don't
true.
think the
Yeah,
council
that's
should
true.
endorse anything that is specific to a company. We can talk about values, as Councilor Rand mentioned, and that's a good starting point, but we have to be extremely careful.
Councilor Flowers, did you?
I did. Thank you. I guess I've just been thinking about the whole discussion that's unfolding. And I, particularly Councilor Houseman, I hear you articulating that part of what is important to you, and this is about the use of taxpayer money. And I do agree, I agree that for a resolution, there are many resolutions that I feel like we have passed that part of the whereas section is a laying out of facts. So I can understand and respect this trajectory where you are laying out facts to get to an end. I'm wondering if there's a way, I've heard you responding about making some edits, and I'm wondering if one of the places that the council as a whole is more inclined to head. I do agree that a resolution, a strong resolution should lay out the facts that lead up to the resolution, or else how do you get to the therefore be it resolved? So I guess what I'm pondering, and this is, I suppose, it's a question primarily, Councilor Houseman, for you as the author, but as I'm listening to the council discuss, I'm pondering whether there's a way to think through what might be other facts to lay out that are not just, I guess it would broaden the resolution and maybe make it broader than you hope, but in springboarding towards that conversation about corporate citizenship and all of its sort of breadth, thinking about, and there are, like, as I said, there are communities that already have responsible employer ordinances, so I think we would have a place to start to think about what might be included, what might be things that we see that are enforceable or have been enforced in other municipalities, and how do they match us? And then I'm wondering if there's a way perhaps to address them as part of the facts, that there are multiple factual pieces of information that you might include that would not apply only to one business, but to many, could apply to many or any, and that those would be the things that we would articulate as are wanting to put ourselves in opposition to, again, as a springboard maybe to a broader conversation. But I hear you talking about taxpayer money, and so I think it seems to me that both that's an important topic for all corporate citizenship, not just this one, but it seems to me it's also an important topic for you for the resolution in whatever form it takes. So I think whatever further conversation we have, I really hear you saying that that's an important piece, is to identify what our values are around when there is use of public funds somehow wrapped up in a project.
Yeah, and the other thing I think that is important that I'm hearing, and I think it's worthwhile feedback, is that this should not be, to Councilor Frady's point, be viewed as a new tool, as a cudgel for constituents or councilors to deploy in a given development. That is not what this resolution is about for me. And I would not want there to be any mistake that that's not what this is about for me. And that, I don't think any of us on the council would want constituents coming to us and say, hey, write a resolution. I really don't like my neighbor's application, to put a garage on his house. Write me a resolution, try to get it before the council to oppose it. That's very much not what this is, and it's not intended to be. And I think it's appropriate to at least try, we may not be successful, but at least try to have a resolution that makes clear in some fashion that that's not what's going on here. Because for me, that is not what's going on here. I'm focused on corporate citizenship relative to taxpayer money. That's what I'm focused on. And the issue came to my attention through a very specific set of facts, and I tried, and I quoted those facts verbatim, try to make it very clear that this is not opinion or, pontificating. These are the facts, this is the history, this is the record. That's why I attached the copies of the letter. So anyway, I don't want to digress. I mean, I take Councilor Frady's point that if in passing this resolution, or that in supporting this resolution, it be viewed in its appropriate context for its appropriate purpose. So, I think in that respect, Councilor Frates and I are on the same page, although I think we may at the end disagree ultimately on this resolution. But I think,
so.
but I value his input in that regard. Did you want
Can I
to?
just respond to what is that okay?
Yeah, and then we'll hear from Councilor Frates.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate that, and I will say personally, to me, the strength of what's being resolved here, which for me, I think I read this as the whereas sections are laying out facts. For me, the meat of it is the resolution, what is being resolved here. And so I guess I will just say to you that I think the strength of the resolution portion is such that, I would have been happy to support this in its form, but I also really think there's value to us being able to work together to see if we can, and I hear you saying that.
Yeah.
But I do just want to articulate that, to me, the strength of where this ends is its strength, and it's where I'd like to see us be able to jump off from. So I would have supported it in this form as well. I'm open to seeing where it goes as well.
Yeah. It was a difficult resolution to write because of what I'm trying to attempt to do. Yeah, Councilor Frates.
Yeah, before you went on this soliloquy, the one before, I think summed up the resolution. You did it in generic language, you talked about corporate behavior.
Yeah.
But if it's proven that this corporation did have an end game and was deceitful and doing as you described.
I'm trying to not say anything about, and it's not, no one's deceitful. I'm trying to.
Reprehensible, not to you, but to the corporation.
Yeah.
So I would like to see something to that effect. I think what we're doing is we're trying to close this loophole, and if we take more specific language towards that, that would be very effective.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just feel like there is a better way to come at this, and I'm thinking that we're all coming to this conclusion if we can soften the language a little bit.
I don't view this through the lens of, as you said, deceitful. I view this sort of as a contract, okay? A bargain for exchange, a contract, a term of the contract is not being followed. That's bad. When it happens between private parties, that's one thing. In this case, it happened with the public money, and so that's another thing. And that's really what I'm trying to get at. But the only way I could figure out a way to get at that was to recite a very, verbatim, a very specific history which shows the bargain for exchange and what appears to be a breach of the contract.
And I think using the language you just said, and if we play back the tape, not specifically going to the language that's in the resolution, I think we can get there. That's what I'm trying to say to you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, and you just kind of summed it all up a few minutes ago when you said it all relates to good corporate citizenship in relation to using taxpayer funds.
Yeah.
And I think that can be incorporated somewhere in the, now therefore be it resolved, also in the final document.
I will say I welcome written suggestions from the councilors, whether it's specific language or, a more general suggestion as to what kind of changes you might make to make it a better resolution. I welcome that. Okay. And in terms of passage, if it takes some time, then that takes some time. But I also don't want it to extend forever. I mean, I would like the council to focus on trying to do that, let's say within, the next week or so. And so that hopefully by the time the next council meeting rolls around, we can look at some of those suggested changes or edits and then talk about those. Because, I mean, this is an unusual resolution. I mean, I knew that when I was writing it. And so it's important to do our best to work together to try to get it done right.
So I would make a motion if there's no other discussion to hold, but
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilor Rand, yeah.
If it's okay, I just will say one last thing. I just wanted to thank Councilor Houseman for bringing this forward. I think whether some of these facts remain in the final resolution or not, I think it's really important that the city council got a chance to read them. I know I've been immersed in them for the past couple of years, and so I think this was a really valuable discussion, and we'll probably continue to get something out of it beyond this resolution, so thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. Councilor Frady's.
yes, I would like to make a motion to hold this particular resolution and its counterpart measure, and I accept your apology in advance because as I confided in you, I did not get the resolution in my packet. That's what I was trying to say to you,
Okay.
neither electronically nor,
Okay. I apologize if my temper
Well,
got the better of me. I did check with other
we're going
councilors
to
and
be
found out that we
co-authors
had
on
it.
this thing,
Yeah.
so we might as well get along.
Yeah, I agree. I
Okay.
agree.
Second. Second.
Second. So I will accept edits, and all those in favor of the motion to hold this,
Aye.
I will vote in favor, and we will hold this until we convene again.
We'll take a 5-minute recess.
That sounds good. Motion, do we need a motion for that? Yeah. Accept a motion to take a 5-minute recess of the subcommittee.
So moved?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion
In committee of the whole.
Probably, but.
recess the committee of the whole for 5 minutes.
So moved.
So moved.
Second? All
Second.
in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
No, nice work. Yeah, I think we can come up with something that makes everybody happy without sticking it to them.
That's fine.
You're already out of there, right?
Call to order, Subcommittee on Finance and Property, call to order, Councilor at Large. The next item on our agenda,
As a whole,
Council as a whole.
as a whole.
As a whole.
Counselor at Large or Counselor Flowers, myself,
Good point.
Counselor Clary.
We are being
Council at
very orderly.
I called to order the councilors at large, too.
I think we're very orderly. We're sitting.
This is just for the folks who are here, just to be clear, I'm going to briefly read what this order is, although the councilors are familiar with it. Order number 444 is an order submitted by the mayor that the City Council of the City of Beverly approves the mayor's request to raise and appropriate $320,831 to be placed into the fiscal 2020 operating budget. The additional funds are a result of an increase in the final Chapter 70 funds that will be distributed to the city and consequently are being requested to support school-related costs. The mayor requests that the total amount of $53,360 be appropriated to fund an increase in estimated school choice sending tuition assessments, and $44,771 to be appropriated to fund an increase in estimated charter school sending tuition assessments. And the balance, which is $222,700, be appropriated to the Beverly Public Schools in support of its FY20 operating budget. Questions or comments? Actually, the first thing I'd like to do is hear from our budget analyst for an update, if he has one, relative to information for the undesignated fund balance and certified free cash.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, everyone. If I could just quickly recap some of the issues we discussed here. As you know, in May of this year and in June as well, when we're doing the budget deliberations, I had recommended to the council that we should not be doing any supplemental appropriations unless we have the balance sheet completed. That is a best practice in municipal government, and as you all know, I'm working hard with the council and the administration to incorporate many of these best practices as we move forward, as well as, you know, with the financial policies. That said, on September 3rd, the mayor requested this raise and appropriate due to the additional funding that they received here in the city. We didn't know this until the month of July, as I indicated to you at our last meeting. And I have recommended as your budget analyst to hold this and to wait and just see. I'm not saying we shouldn't spend it or we should spend it. My position as your budget analyst is to incorporate best practices, protect the financial interests of the city, and make sound and wise decisions. It was my view that if you would have voted on this prior to receiving the balance sheet, you would be making an uninformed decision. And I wanted to be clear as to my role. I appreciate your support. I think you did the right thing on behalf of the taxpayers at your last meeting when you decided to wait for this. So literally every day for the last week and a half or since we met, I'd be on the computer, I'm looking for the balance sheet. Did they approve it? Did they approve it? And at 4:30 this afternoon, they still hadn't approved it. And I was getting ready to come up and tell you to still hold it here. And then at 5:15, the chair and I are on the phone going over a couple of issues for this meeting tonight. And as he's talking to me, I get on the laptop and lo and behold, the balance sheet has been approved. And I have that tonight. And I literally analyzed this as I was eating my dinner before I came flying here. But I can tell you that the balance sheet is in. It's somewhat consistent with what you heard from His Honor the Mayor. And simply put on, and this is strictly general fund we're going to talk about because that's where we're coming from, the undesignated fund balance, which you've heard me over and over say, went up to $12.3 million, almost $12.4 million from 11.1 last year. That's a good thing. And our overall free cash certification, which is derived by a whole host of numbers, came in at $9,236,610. That is your certified free cash, which you can by law appropriate as you deem appropriate, and you know if the administration submits an order to you. What does this tell me? As your budget analyst, this tells me you can now afford the appropriation request of the mayor. I have no problem with it. As I indicated last week when I met with you, if this had dropped like it did last year, it was entirely possible I was going to recommend not to spend this money. But now I can stand before you and tell you that in my judgment and opinion, you can now afford to do this. The question is whether you want to do it. That's entirely up to you. In terms of those two other categories, I know we had some discussion. Actually, it caught me a bit off guard. As a bean counter, I just took for granted we have to balance our budget. And to me, these are, Chapter 70 is reoccurring revenue, and those assessments are reoccurring expenditure. And it's appropriate, as I wrote to you, that to use that money for this purpose, in my opinion. You are under no legal obligation to use this money for school expenditure, but I could make an argument you should. And that's, again, a policy decision, but you're not legally required to do so. But having said that, and I will follow up with a written report to all of you, because I just got this at 5:15, but it is my oral recommendation to you and to the subcommittee is that I am still standing firm. You must, in my view, appropriate for those two line items, the $53,000, the $44,000. You've got to balance your budget. And I would urge you to do that in terms of the $222,000. If it is the prerogative of the council to appropriate that and give it to the school system under the conditions has been articulated to you as far as information, that is a policy decision. I would have no objection to it, and I would defer the judgment and the wisdom of both certainly the subcommittee and the council as a whole on that. The only other thing I'd add to that, and then I'm more than happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman, of you or your colleagues, I did provide you a spreadsheet going back to almost 1995. I thought it was important that you have some sort of historical information as to, I thought it was really important. And what that really says, there's been some mistaken impressions of how we post funding, and I'm sure the finance director would support me on this as well, but I can assure you we're going to get $9.2 million in change in Chapter 70 money All of that is going to go to the operations. That's how we post it. And really what changes, if you look at that spreadsheet, you see the direct city funding. That's what will go up or down or variable, which I've talked to some of you privately in my one-on-one dialogue with regard to this. So I hope that that spreadsheet is of assistance in your budget deliberations, but bottom line to it, it's my recommendation that you do fund those two smaller items, and I have no problem as your budget analyst if you want to spend $222,000 and change on the school department. I have no objections from a budgetary perspective. Mr. Chairman, I'm more than happy to answer any questions you or your colleagues may have.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Perry from the subcommittee? From the council at large? No? Thank you, Mr. Perry.
Thank you.
Well, I guess I'll ask one. I thought I would have rather gone last, but I'll go first and last, maybe.
Go ahead.
All right, Mr. Perry, I mean, there's a faction of people, a number of people that would like to see us. I know that we couldn't do it. We would have to send this order back to the mayor if we wanted to give that entire amount of money to the school department.
Correct.
As opposed to paying through bills, which we have to pay anywhere. But where on the city side of the budget could we pay those bills from? I mean, the mayor has that account reserved for unforeseen.
That's
An unforeseen,
right.
something that came up unforeseen.
Right, that's a great question, Mr. President. I wrote to you, which you'll be taking up, I believe, next week. The police contract was recently approved, and they're requesting funding from that specific line item. I have reviewed that as well as sat with the finance director with regard to that. We're going to still have to appropriate more money out of that for the fire contract, which is still needs to be resolved. And then the last thing to be resolved is City Hall employees. That has not been adjudicated yet. So my suggestion to certainly you, but also the administration, I really don't think there's money there for that. I think we have to hold on to that because it could be entirely possible we won't have enough money even for that, given for the final fire contract as well as the City Hall. So I don't really see that as a source of revenue for this situation.
Thank you.
So I will follow up just for a moment. The costs for the charter school send-in tuition and the school choice sending tuition is a reoccurring expense.
Correct.
Correct? And the money that was unanticipated, and that the money that is coming in, that the mayor is looking for us to appropriate, is also a reoccurring expense, right?
No, it's a reoccurring revenue.
Excuse me, I
Yeah,
misspoke.
Chapter 70 is a reoccurring revenue, correct.
Yeah. So in general, and according to our financial policies and objectives that we adopted as a council this term, reoccurring expenses should be funded by reoccurring revenue, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so, in effect, the money that's coming in here is reoccurring, the expenses are reoccurring, and in your opinion, and according to the policy, city's financial policies, that would be an appropriate way to spend the money. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yes, Councilor Flaherty.
Can we ask the superintendent to come up and talk about that 98,000? Would that be okay?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry.
Good evening.
Can you just talk about those two items and why they went up since July or June?
To the best that I can, I'll give you the best description that I can. I have to say that, the formula changed, and so I'm not exactly sure about all of it. But I will tell you that when we do the budget during the budget cycle, the state, in the governor's budget, which is the budget that we use to build the budget, has an estimate on a cherry sheet that says, this is what you can anticipate for the assessments for this and for that, and this is what you can anticipate for the revenue that's coming in for Chapter 70. So that's the way that works. The numbers that the city used on those two items in the state assessments were the ones that were predicted in the governor's budget. The numbers that came in the budget that was approved were higher. So that's where that 98 comes from.
So it's not like the school choice, for example, we're not seeing more kids going out, that's why we have a bigger expense.
So I would guess that we have more students that did go out of district in the fiscal year, but it wasn't a mass exodus or anything like that. So I think that I would say, and Jean is not here tonight, but I think that she estimated that number to be around 12 when we went back and looked at it. 12 more went out, but in addition, more than 12 more came in. So, that's the way that it works. And also, parents have the ability to school choice their students to wherever they want. So it's not something that we don't have the authority to stop them from doing that.
And you might not know the answer to this, but maybe Brian does. Historically, does this happen from year to year? Go from like 98,000, or is it usually pretty right on?
I don't have the, thank you for the question, Counselor. I don't have the actual historical fluctuations. It does fluctuate from time to time, but for every ebb, there's a flow, and it typically balances itself out. What's unique about this year is the timing of everything, and I believe your budget analyst, Mr. Perry, explained that a little bit during the public hearing last week, that this is really a timing issue because things are happening so late. We do need to balance the budget prior to setting the tax rate, so.
Question for Superintendent Chirocek, if you don't mind. Thank you, thank you, Superintendent. At the City Council meeting just passed, you, and I don't have it in front of me, but you submitted sort of a list of priorities for how the money would be spent. So I have sort of two questions about that. One is that your superintendent's list, if you will, or is that the school committee's list? And the second question that goes with that is that worked out mutually, or does one of you have sort of the final decision, you on one hand or the school committee on the other hand, in terms of exactly how that money is spent?
Good question. So the list of priorities that were listed on the slide were put together by the school committee. I went forward with what a list of recommendations from the leadership would be. So things that we felt were imperative, that were we to get the extra money, we would have. The school committee then also had discussion around that list and added to that list. So I would say it was a collaborative effort, but I believe that in the end, it's the school committee that has the final authority as to approve whether or not. I make recommendations about the budget, but the final spending authority is the school committee. And I hope I got that right. Did I get that right?
And has the school committee taken any kind of a final vote, or is this sort of a chicken and the egg? They're waiting to see if they have the money before they make a vote, So it was a preliminary discussion on what we would do, I think largely because we were not sure if we were going to be able to get all of the money, or if there was only going to be, but we did prioritize to some extent. I believe that there's a meeting scheduled coming up for the discussion as to and then a vote as to what we would do with it. But that's a preliminary list that they have so far. There was no formal vote taken. Okay, and is it fair to say that new items are not likely to pop up on that list, that this is the
that list
scope of the list?
The list exceeds the amount of money in either case, 222 or 320. So there are more items on the list than there is money. So
there always is.
Yeah, I think that's the way it goes. So, it wasn't a complete list, but it was a pretty full list of things that we would do. Many are carryovers from the budget discussions that we had in the spring in terms of things that we had prioritized around what we would like to see done. And a couple were following the same goals. So we have a strategic plan, strategies for district improvement, and our goals are clearly laid out for social emotional learning and for innovative practices and inclusive practices. And so all of the priorities aligned with a particular goal, and they were sort of the committee went through together as a group, talked about which things. They asked if I had a top priority, and I shared that I did, and that would be the counselor at the high school. And then there was further discussion around what we would, what would we do from there. But the list much exceeded the 320. So there's probably not more coming, but we certainly could fulfill more of them based upon what the decision is.
Thank you. While the superintendent's up here, anyone else have any other questions for her? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Councilors, any other questions before the subcommittee deliberates its motion? Oh, Councilor Rand.
Thank you.
Council Flowers on the other side.
Oh, okay.
I did just want to make a comment that while this is the school choice and charter school assessments are reoccurring, this is not a new assessment. They have been reoccurring. They currently come out of a particular line item in the budget. So I just want to make that statement again, make that clear, that they don't currently come out of the school budget.
I see. Okay. Councilor Flowers?
Thank you. I was wondering, just for people who are listening who may not understand everything that we're talking about, I didn't know if Mr. Perry or Mr. Ailes could just explain where free cash comes from?
Mr. Perry?
People don't know what that is.
Sure, Counselor, great question. I only have one copy of it, but I will be forwarding you a report hopefully this week explaining, this is the balance sheet for those, I apologize, I only have one. I just, like I said, got it about an hour before this. What it is free cash, it's a calculation not only of the general fund, but it's also those 7 or 8 enterprise funds we have, but the definition of those are called retained earnings. So we have free cash in general fund and retained earnings in the enterprise funds, and I have them as well, and I've been looking at them as the night has progressed. Where does it come from? What happens is when the city closes the books at the end of the year, and they bring out the outside auditors, I think Bryant works around August or so to come in, they will figure out off the audit reports what is known as that undesignated fund balance. And that would, and I'll be more than happy to show you right afterwards, and I'll get you copies of all this, that's the starting point, that's the top number. And that is a calculation of a whole bunch of stuff on the audit report, which is like that thick. And it takes months to, a month or so to calculate that. And then what they do in the calculation, Counselor, is you reduce that by personal property receivables if people aren't paying the taxes. Then we look at overdrawn accounts. Did we overspend certain accounts? And there is a list of them here, and I'll be reviewing them over the next couple of days. And then you reduce from that that free cash that may not have been recorded. We didn't have that this year. And then finally, it's called deferred revenue. It's which is a pretty big number. It's things like your overlay account, things of that nature, goes to that. And then we come up with a number. So it's a ticky-tacky kind of thing that goes down. But where it basically comes from is, like I say, off the audit report to the end, that undesignated fund balance is the most important thing that really drives this number here. And I can assure you that the rating agencies, Moody's and Standard & Poor's, when they look to give us a rating, as the finance director indicated, I think we've had 2 during his tenure, and I commend him and the administration for that. But that's one of the most important items they look at, is that undesignated fund balance, and then the free cash secondarily. That's why I encourage you. The only other comment I probably should have had, I hope that answers your question, Counselor, but
Can I just ask a follow-up?
by all means.
Is it fair to say, though, is this amount money that in part has come in from taxpayers that was not needed in the previous budget? Is that fair to say? Is this taxpayer money that's then free cash that's being certified?
Oh, it's definitely taxpayer money. Oh, sure. And the 9 of you have the authority to spend it. The mayor can ask you like he's doing. Well, no, he won't. They're going to come to you, I think. Brian and I had a conversation. I believe they're going to come to you in the future about using, they're almost earmarking close to half of this for as an example, the 1.2 million. It's going, a lot of this free cash is going to go right back to the schools in the form of paying off the debt for the school security that you're all familiar with as an example. So it is taxpayer money, yes. A lot of it is ready to be respent. But as I've encouraged you, and I encourage the administration, you can't spend it all. You can't spend the zero, because you carry it forward next year to protect that undesignated fund balance, and thus protecting the free cash. And it's part of the strategy of good financial practices, which I believe the administration and the council has. The only other comment I'd add, I didn't do it. I think it's important I say this, and I said it last week, and I know Mr. Ailes said it, and I'll reiterate it again. You've entered a new era of municipal finance here in the city of Beverly here. The fact that you have that $110 million middle school that we've agreed to, and the fact that we just agreed last week for a $30 million odd police station puts us in an era that we have to be careful. You just got to be, I understand how elected and appointed officials want to do a lot of stuff. It's normal, it's common. But I think you've done an awful lot of good stuff already, in my opinion. And now that we have this $30 million or $28 million police station on the table, and as you know, we have to use free cash in the next 2 to 3 years to reduce that mortgage payment, I have to urge you some caution. We got to be careful how we spend our money. And that's why I think the recommendation I'm giving you tonight to make sure you balance your budget with the two smaller items. And if you so desire to spend this money on the schools, that's your choice. I have no problem with it. But, you know, I would be careful not to go beyond that, because I'd be very uncomfortable. I have a difficult time recommending to you to go above and beyond that to spend more money.
You all set?
Hope that answers, does that answer your question, Council?
It does.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, did you have a follow-up? Mr. Ailes
I
wants
do
to
not
also
have a
speak.
follow-up question. I just, and I can do it later. I just wanted to share where my reservations are, but I can do that later.
Okay. Mr. Ailes? Yes.
I do want to just add one or maybe two additional comments to what Mr. Perry said. I agreed with everything he said in terms of the definition of free cash. However, it's important to understand that this is a cumulative rolling balance, right? So it's not like we closed the books and at the end of the year we had a $9 million operating surplus. You'll recall last year we certified at $7 million. So now that we're at $9 million, all that means is we brought in $2 million more than we spent last year. Out of $140 million that we spent last year, we brought in $2 million more than we did, than we spent. So, and I also wanted to give you just a general perspective, because we talk in the millions here, and it's a large number for us because our perspective around those finances are either personal perspectives or situations. But a $9 million in this city, we every week spend $3 million. So it's effectively 3 weeks worth of cushion. And just put that in perspective in your own personal finances. If you have a savings account, do you have more than 3 weeks worth of your expenses in your own personal savings account? So there is value there in terms of budgetary flexibility that is important to maintain within the city. Just wanted to make that point.
Thank you.
Councilor Houseman?
Yes.
I guess I wanted to catch Mr. Ailes or Mr. Perry, whoever wants to speak on this. So my question is, we have $9 million in free cash coming in. What would it be poor financial practice to pay those two assessments out of that?
So there's a couple things. You'll recall last week, this council approved a $30 million police station. Part of that plan calls on free cash over the next 3 years to pay down that debt so that the debt can fit into the annual operating budget. And so this year, even though we just received certification this evening, as Mr. Perry mentioned, and will refine in the coming weeks and share with the council, a large portion of that is already accounted for. We've actually already spent it. You know, we've got the school security upgrades, which were authorized last year, that we only paid half of, and we need to pay the remaining $1.3 million of that. We've got city policies that are going to shift 10% of that certification over to the stabilization. 2% of that certification into the OPEB trust fund, which is a benefit to all employees on both sides, the city, the school, related to their retirement benefits and their health care once they retire. It's their health care payments. So we'll be transferring that per city policy. And then, you know, we're targeting, hopefully, without having the conversations with the mayor, a substantial amount of money that needs to go to that police station to pull that down. And right there, if you do the math, you're at a place where we likely would be able to replenish, but we probably wouldn't be growing the free cash balance for next year. And we need to be mindful, and we've said this over and over again, you've got to protect that fund balance, both the undesignated fund balance and the free cash balance, so that it doesn't begin to deteriorate. So we're already kind of spent a good portion of this. But to your point, of using this money for free cash. Nothing prevents us legally from appropriating from free cash. The real concern comes with growing a budget with recurring expenditures, which these assessments are, and using a revenue source that is stagnant or one time to fund those. You would need to continue to go back and back and back and eventually begin depleting. So it's not a good practice. It's not consistent with the policies that the administration and the council have passed, and it's certainly not something I could recommend.
Thank you.
All right.
Councilor Flowers, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to share, I appreciate, first of all, I did not get to thank Mr. Perry for coming up because we kind of transitioned funny, so thank you for answering my question. I wanted to just share some of where my reservations are, and I want to say that I both understand and respect what's the argument that's being made here. I understand the financial policies that we have talked about, but I am struggling with the notion that I think Councilor Rand did make an important distinction, which is that charter and choice are reoccurring costs that occur on the city side of the budget every year. And so these are not unforeseen new line items. We are short in 2 line items based on the assessment that has come in. And so where I'm struggling, where I have reservations, it is that, I understand certainly that we can't spend the free cash down to 0, but as I sit and think about our schools and the needs and listening to our superintendent say, the needs far surpass even the 320,000. And I think about the way that, that our budget is really all one budget, and that our children and their education is as much our obligation as everything else that we do. And it's not, to my mind, it's not the schools against the city is the schools, and the schools are the city. And so I am having a hard time with the notion that we only are talking about this additional $320,831 because the Chapter 70 money came in higher than the governor's number. But it seems conceivable to me that there could be a scenario where we correctly budgeted Chapter 70 money and yet charter and choice assessments go up based on the number of students at charter and choice. And we would have to figure out how to come up with this less than $100,000 to come up with where we're short on our bills. And we have this additional $320,831 in my reading of what the state is doing, because Beverly was assessed as having particularly increased populations in certain areas, including English language learners, students who are grappling with extreme poverty, our special needs education department. And so that makes me think about what is our obligation with this money? What is in the spirit of what the state intends with this money? And being a community that has this free cash, which is from our taxpayers, if we are short on 2 of our bills on the city side of the budget, I'm having a hard time feeling like we can't find the $98,000 to pay those 2 bills, which are a reoccurring cost, but the difference is an assessment difference this year. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I feel like looking at those numbers, then I might be oversimplifying this, but I feel like we can look at those numbers and then build the budget on the higher assessment next time, and maybe we have less students trace out, and then as Mr. Ailes was saying, it ebbs and flows, and we catch up. But it seems to me that charter and choice are bills that we have to pay regardless of whether the state is trying to fix its funding formula. And the fact that we have these increased populations is the reason that we have this $320,000 to talk about at all. So that's where I'm struggling. I think for me, I think it's important for us to consider why the state even deemed Beverly deserving of this money. And I believe it's to educate those students that we have an increasing population of, that are our obligation to give them the best education we can.
Thank you, Councilor Flowers. I share your struggle. I want to talk about another struggle, if I may call on Mr. Ailes again.
Good thing I had a coffee tonight, Mr. Chairman.
in our successive recent years of budgeting as a city, we have, and this is sort of a statement, a question in the form of a statement. Isn't it the case, I guess, that we on the, and I'm not sure exactly, it's not the schools in the city, it's all of us together, but on the municipal as opposed to the educational side, that budget has, as I recall from going, line by line through the various different departments, with few exceptions and with very little difference in the absolute dollar amount, has pretty much been level funded, certainly this last year. Is that fair to say, just as a limited statement?
Yeah, and I actually have some numbers to lend some context.
Yeah, I'll give you a moment. And then, but at the same time, when it comes to educational spending, we have increased that each year over year for several years as well. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, the only caveat I would add is that both, or all departments across have had costs that have increased year over year. And we've been successful enough here with our new growth to be able to fund, to at least maintain a level service throughout our municipal departments.
Right. And as I also seem to recall, whether it was in this budget, I guess it was maybe the previous year's budget, you can help me out here a little bit on that. The administration went to the municipal departments and asked for them to bring money back that had been budgeted to them. Is that correct?
That was the last fiscal year, FY19.
The last fiscal year. And what was the purpose, or maybe what was the reason for trying to get money back from the municipal department heads? And,
Okay.
and was a similar request made of the educational department?
It was not. The rationale behind that request was that at the point in time with which we made the request, let me back up. When we build the budget in June, we're looking into the future and making estimates on a number of different, probably 120 different revenue streams. One of the biggest revenue streams that we have uncertainty around is motor vehicle excise, and that fluctuates from year to year. So that's one of the areas that we view as economically tied. In a bad economy, those revenues will dip. In a good economy, they will exceed our projections and deposit back into free cash. This past fiscal year, FY19, the largest commitment for motor vehicle excise goes out in January. And so when we saw that commitment and compared it to previous fiscal years and extrapolated it out for the remainder of FY19, we said, uh-oh, we might fall short here. So halfway into the fiscal year, we realized we could potentially fall short in a major revenue stream for the city. That's why we do regular budget reviews. And so at that point in time, the mayor and I sat down, we kind of took a range of where we thought it was going to fall based on the numbers we had before us at the time. And we realized if we were to maintain our undesignated fund balance, we needed to claw back some appropriated expenditures. And so we made those decisions in areas that didn't affect the service levels of individual departments. Some projects got delayed a little bit, but overall, it wasn't as painful as one might think. And what ended up happening was a supplemental, or the second commitment for motor vehicle excise blew every previous commitment out of the water. So all of a sudden, we went from thinking we would be very short. Late in the fiscal year, we realized, okay, now we're going to be more on target. We're okay. So it basically alleviated some of the anticipated pressure. At that point in time, it was a bit late in the fiscal year, so not all of those funds were able to be spent and ultimately dropped into the free cash certification, and that's a significant reason why it went from $7 million up to $9 million this past fiscal year. Now, your previous comment about the level of increases, between municipal departments and the school department, I do want to give you some context. I mean, we're doing, and I know the mayor has said this before, we're doing everything we can to ensure that the schools get resources they need to deliver quality education. We also are very conscious of making sure that resources go to our individual municipal departments so that they can continue to deliver the high-level service that our citizens deserve and our taxpayers deserve. Now, this past fiscal year, if the council approves this additional appropriation of $320,000, that will mean that the fiscal budget for FY20 will have increased $4,465,000. Of that $4,465,000, $151,000 of it, or over 70% of the new money, will have gone to the school department. So this notion of city versus school, we're all one city here, and we're trying to do everything we can to make sure that our quality is there that we're used to in this city. This is a $90,000 appropriation that we need to fund before we close go to set our tax rate. If it is not funded in this manner, we would basically be forced to go relook at the areas within the municipal side of government, call in our department heads, and look for areas to cut municipal departments. So that is what we're faced with here. We're trying to fund a noted deficit, which, by the way, we didn't have any other numbers when we set the budget. All we had before us was the governor's budget, so that was the best data we had at that time. And so I just wanted to make a couple of those points clear to you all, to put it in context. I mean, we're talking about $90,000. It's a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, but we're also talking about $60 million that's in the school department right now, that they're doing great things with, and we want to continue to let that happen. So in order to do that, we need to protect our fund balance. We need to protect our free cash. We need to make sure that our budgets don't grow in a rate that's unsustainable. So thank you for the time to just add a few comments to your question. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I don't, I'm just sitting here thinking.
Okay. Councilors? If, Councilor Brady.
Okay. I just wanted to say, for the folks at home and in the audience, you may not have known that the chair was an attorney, and now you do from the prior discussion. My past profession...
We were aware.
Oh, you were aware?
Yeah.
My past profession was in financial services, and for 30-odd years I attained many federal and state licenses in order to manage funds for clients and put them in markets that are at risk. And the underlying tenet in all those licenses was the prudent man rule. And as an officer of the city, it still applies. What would a prudent man or woman do when faced with a financial decision, and especially putting money at risk? And that's why I can't say enough about our finance director, and especially Mr. Perry, because he embodies the prudent man. So when you said to us last time to hold, because we didn't have the balanced budget, the budget balanced, and now it is, that took over one check mark. And the superintendent, when she laid out so eloquently on her slide what she was going to do with the money, and she better apparently, or otherwise we're going to send a resolution because you changed your mind. But I'm going to look to the chair, whatever pleasure you have on this motion.
Well, I would accept a motion
And
from
Just
either
real
of my
quick,
colleagues on the subcommittee.
I thought Council Flowers spoke very well, and she's struggling with a lot of the same things that I have the past week. That's why I wanted to not take action on it last week, above and beyond not having a balance sheet. No, it's a tough one, but I think whereas we have our financial analyst and our finance director saying that our only other alternative is going to him calling in the municipal department heads and nitpicking through their budget, which I don't think is a is a bad exercise. I just don't think that it's something we can do right now. So what is Council Frady's doing? Did you make a motion to
I
approve
did
the
not yet.
mayor's
I was just
request?
going to see what the chair's pleasure was. Motion to approve? Is that what
Actually,
you're looking for?
I do have one other question, if I may.
Of course, you're the chair
For Mr.
and an
Perry.
attorney.
I just want to clarify from my understanding, Councilor Rand's comment that the school choice and school sending tuition assessments in the present budget are on the, are not assessed from the educational department, but are assessed from somewhere in the municipal side? Is that, if I understand your point?
It's always been that way.
It's always been that way?
Yes.
I'll let Mr. Perry, given I dragged him to the podium, answer it anyway.
Oh,
Always been that way. I think it's how we look at it. These are educational issues. Charter school and school choice are educational issues. The assessments are paid for out of the overall revenue, which includes Chapter 70. So I really don't know how to answer it. I think an argument can be made for both ways, that it is education and that it is, really, I don't think it's either or, in my view.
Let me ask the question
Sure.
differently then. When I pull out my budget and go through it line by line, we end up having one number for the school department, and we vote on that.
Correct.
And everything else, we go through line by line
Correct.
and vote on those. The school's choice and the school sending costs, will those show up in my budget book?
Yes.
In that one number for the
No.
schools, or on the other side, somewhere in line by line?
It-
If it does,
it's-
where does it show up?
Great question. It shows up in the assessments. It's it's late in the book. It's not within the school budget. If that maybe that helps clarify Councilor Flowers' comment. It's not paid for within the school budget of $60 million. It's a separate appropriation outside of the school budget. So maybe that's what the council's trying to get, and that I totally agree with. Yeah, it's outside of that. Whether, just as the vocational school is outside of the Beverly School operating budget, it is a separate line item that we appropriated like we do assessments. The question, I guess, so it is separate. So I think the council will be correct on that. The flip side of that, is that considered an educational cost? I think an argument could be also made that it is, because it's certainly not police or fire or anything, it's an educational issue. But the council is correct, it's not inside the school budget.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's a helpful clarification. So I interrupted you.
no,
Council
that's
President, I
okay.
think.
No, I just,
Okay. Listen, the subcommittee can hold this for further thought and report it out at our next full council meeting. So we can hold it this evening, or we can accept a motion one way or another on it. And I will listen to either of my subcommittee member, Councilor Martin.
Just, why would you hold it?
I'm waiting for a motion.
But then again, why would, I'll ask,
If
why
I
would,
don't, if I don't get a motion,
I understand that, but why would the committee hold it?
well, I guess what I'm saying is by definition, if we don't act on it tonight, it carries over to our.
I understand that, but why would you not act on it?
I'm not suggesting a hold or not a hold. I said I'm looking for a motion.
Okay.
Could you just rephrase how it's going to read and what the approval or denial or?
Well, so I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Council President, you had more sort of procedural experience than I have. We could have one motion that encapsulates the entire order as it's written.
we can't
We,
amend it.
pardon?
Well, we can't. I
But
don't
we
think
can,
can
but
amend
my
it.
understanding is that we could have a separate vote on the 53 and change, the 44 and change, and the 22 and change. Is that correct?
I would check with
Is it-
Mr. Rails or our city solicitor's office.
Okay.
It's the whole.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
That's not my understanding. That the vote had to be on.
It's either all or nothing
All or
on,
nothing.
on the entire order. Okay, so I stand corrected, so, but I think that clarifies your question.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
a motion to approve would be the whole amount, and
As appropriated in the fashion suggested by the mayor in this order, yeah.
yeah, I'd make a motion to approve that. To me, the $90,000 is a drop in the bucket. And we can just postpone Dodge Street for a week, and there's $90,000.
Is there a second to that motion?
Our budget analyst had his
For
hand up.
discussion, for discussion.
Second for discussion.
Thank you, and I want to hear from Councilor Flowers first, and then the budget analyst. Councilor Flowers, you had your hand up?
Thank you. I did. I have just a process question, and I think I know the answer, but I want to ask it. I think it's a question for our solicitor's office. If this were a different order, a councilor could also amend the order. Is this unamendable? Is this being interpreted as budget appropriation or an order that is amendable? That's my question.
Could you please approach the microphone, please? Thank you.
If this was an order from another councilor, it could be amended on the floor, so I'm curious.
This is a budget appropriation.
So it's all or nothing, there's no amendment to be made.
Correct.
Thank you.
And
Mr. Perry was making
Mr.
a
Perry,
case.
I see, thank you.
The last thing, Mr. Chairman, I want to do is practice law without a license. I think through you, of course.
Yes.
When the mayor submits his budget, that big, thick book there, it's one big order. But as you all know, you go line item by line item by line item. You go one at a time, and from my experience of now having almost three budgets under me, you can amend each and every one as you're going. The city solicitor has suggested it's all or nothing. He just says that. I don't know what supports that. I don't really, I would be fascinated to understand why this body can't do, and even the council is considered, one at a time. I mean, I guess the question is, what's the difference between if we submit the entire budget, is it all or nothing? I don't think that's the case. That's not been the history here. And maybe, I need to be educated better. I would love to hear why.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I don't understand. I think we need more knowledge from the city solicitor's office why that can't be broke down. My instincts tell me you can't. He says, I don't know, he's going to articulate more. Good luck.
So, Councilor Flowers, can I ask what exactly are you asking to amend? Or what are you asking, I guess?
Well, I think my question is that if we get an order from another councilor, there's possibility to amend it, to say, I would make an amendment to this order to vote on it this way, and then that amendment becomes open for discussion. So I think partially I'm asking along the lines too of what Mr. Perry is saying, which is my understanding when we go through the budget is that we could amend individual line items as well. So this is just a process question. I just want clarification for myself what is possible with this order.
You couldn't increase.
No, we could not increase.
I
agree on
think
that.
that's probably where this misunderstanding happened. You couldn't go through an increase out of those three numbers that are stated.
Yes, I agree
You
with that.
couldn't move one amount into another one of those three numbers.
Yes.
I think that's what
But you could reduce individual ones, couldn't it?
but then you couldn't, to head off, I think, what the next question is, I think what I just said, you can't reduce one and put it into another. So yes, if you did want to reduce one of those, or two of those, or three of those, but you cannot then move those numbers, move that amount among those three numbers.
So I'm sorry, if you will stay there for just a moment. So just to clarify my understanding then, we can vote just on this order as it's written, but we could also vote separately on each of these three numbers within the order to approve or not approve that appropriation. Is that correct?
My suggestion, Counselor, or Mr. Chairman, if the committee so chooses to make an amendment, as the solicitor said, you can approve, you can deny, or you can reduce. If you choose to make an amendment to a particular area of the appropriation request, my suggestion would be to accept the amended version and push that out to the committee of the whole as the order. So make an amendment and then Does that make sense?
Well, I think there may be some confusion on the subcommittee, so I don't know what's.
Just like the budget process, right?
Yeah, yes, we can approve it, we can disapprove it, we can reduce it.
Yep.
That's all we can do.
So if you choose to reduce a particular area, you would make that recommendation, subcommittee, and if it approves, then it goes out to the committee of the whole as an amended version.
Yeah, so without making it overly complicated, there are 3 different numbers, and on each one of those numbers, we can approve, reduce, or disapprove, yeah,
Yes.
right.
My only point was, as you vote it out of committee, that it goes as one order, because it is only one order.
At that point, it would be an amended
Yes,
order.
yes, correct.
Thank
We're in
you.
agreement.
I hope so.
Thank you.
All right, so is there, yes, Councilor Flaherty?
Well, whatever recommendation you guys make, if you reduce it and you send it back to the mayor doesn't necessarily have to adhere to what the council says. He can turn around and not fund that particular line item.
That's correct. And we know that at least, we know we have to have a balanced budget in order to set the tax rate. We know we have to do that. So we know that at least as to the 53,000 and the 44,000, we have to do something that's going to move that forward. I suppose we could deny that and then wait for the mayor to come up with the funds somewhere else. That would be a possibility procedurally. Actually, procedurally, Mr. Perry, if the subcommittee were to do that and the council were to approve that approach, do we end up in a time crunch in terms of the sort of the sequencing of the mayor coming back and us considering it in terms of the date by which we have to have a balanced budget?
Yes, in my opinion, you will. You're putting a lot of pressure on the finance team here. They traditionally got to get this done by, I'd say, mid-November, so they can prepare the tax rate, which is a very complicated document. It's not just finances, it's dealing with the assessors' offices and a whole host of issues with assessments. It's very complicated. That's why I'm speculating, I can't speak. Maybe he put this order on September 3rd, but yeah, I'm standing as your budget analyst, recommending you at least pass those 2. And if you want to pass the 3rd one for the 222, I have no objections. That's a policy decision, but I've said it several times, I'm just repeating myself now. I can't encourage you more to do those 2 line items. And I think this is an appropriate way to do it. As I wrote to you and as I've articulated to you as well, I would encourage you to do that.
Councilor Flaherty, go ahead.
So my recommendation, kind of have this committee, we have to do something.
Yep.
Have this finance committee vote it out to the floor, which would be the next Monday night, so council will see that, and then we can get more clarification on anything else, or at least you're making a decision to vote it out and have it go.
I think it needs to come out tonight, in my
Yes, it
opinion.
does.
It's just a question of what that motion is.
Then it can go to the committee of the whole on Monday night, and then we can get more clarification. And you could, just because you got voted out tonight, doesn't mean you have to hold your decision, you always change.
The council can always amend it as a committee of the whole.
Correct.
To go to any one of these different 3 numbers.
Right.
So we could report it out just as it is and continue the conversation and have the vote as a whole, committee of the whole.
So there was a motion on the floor.
Would you repeat the motion? Because I'm not sure I
Yeah,
remember what it was.
After all this, so Mr. Perry is recommending that the 2 line items go through. So are we amending the motion on the floor, or we just approve those? Approve, and then we'll debate it later.
Correct.
Motion to approve.
The mayor's request.
The
The mayor's request, order 444 as written. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion carries 3-0. So it's reported out to committee of the whole
Okay,
for further discussion, deliberation, and vote.
which then can be amended.
Yes, it can be amended that way.
Got it.
Okay. There is no further business before the council this evening or the subcommittee. I would accept.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry to, I know everyone wants to get home, but as to Order 466, I just, we discussed earlier,
Yes,
just to, as a clarifying point, any suggestions, written comments from members of the council should be submitted directly through the clerk's office to be assigned their own order numbers, 466B, C, D, et cetera, if the intent is for them to be discussed on next Monday's meeting. And I would advise, as these aren't late files, they would need to be filed as of Thursday in order to properly be noticed for Monday's meeting.
Thank you very much
Yes,
for
to-
that clarification. I think
Yes.
that's very useful. My mind hadn't gotten that far, so and
Always thinking about the open meeting law.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Liz. There's no more business before the council. I accept a motion to adjourn committee of the whole.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Motion to adjourn finance and property.
So moved?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.